Well, hello there. Firstly, welcome. Welcome to the group. Happy Dose of Enhanced Resilience. Really great to see you here. It's been a while since I did a live video, so I'm just checking that it's actually working. And yeah, brilliant. I can see a few of you coming on, so that's fantastic. So really great to see you here. And I just wanted to welcome you also, not just to the group, but to this live lesson. Lesson 1, where we're going to look specifically at 4 things. So we're going to look at mental health, so what it is and what it isn't, when it's a problem, what causes it to become compromised, and the impact that that can have on life and work. So welcome Sarah, nice to see you. Michaela, Caddy, Sharon, gosh, I haven't seen you for a while, nice to see you here. Hi Nikki, hi Caddy. And Holly, Susie, wonderful, lovely to see you here, and hello Anna. So while we're just waiting for other people to arrive, I'm just going to explain a little bit about why we set this group up in the first place. And really it's because, having all been told to stay at home, to only go outside for food, for health reasons or essential work, and to stay away from other people, the reality is that the regular activities, so social activities and leisure activities that we've relied on maybe up until now to keep us in positive mental health, are no longer available to us. And we've all had to adapt very quickly, haven't we, to a new rhythm of life. So a different way of keeping in touch with all people actually, but including the people that we love, a whole new way of working, so whole new methods of working. And because our brain interprets all change, and that's all change without exception, initially as a threat, for some of us this will have an impact on our mental well-being and in effect our emotional and our psychological resilience, both of which can also affect our physical resilience, and of course vice versa. I'm just going to see who else is here to say hello. Hi Sanjay, wow, lovely to see you here. So when our resilience is low, our ability to maintain our motivation and our focus, and in effect our ability to survive any kind of adversity at all, and more specifically right now, a pandemic, can become compromised. And that's the reason why we set this group up, to provide people with the information, tools, but really importantly as well, the confidence to enable all of us to better manage our mental well-being, and also the mental well-being of those that we live and work with. Because we all feel that sense of responsibility for other people in our lives as well. So before I go on, what I'd really like to do is just ask you just to introduce yourself in the comments, okay? Just to get a bit of interaction here, so that I know who's here. So just tell us first of all your name, and then please tell us something that's been good today. Now, it could be absolutely anything at all. It doesn't need to be something big. There's always something that's been good, even if it's a very small something. And while you're just thinking about that, I'm just going to share mine. So my name's Tamsen Garrie, and I'm the Director of Culture and Associates at Mental Health in the Workplace Limited. What's been good for me is that my family and I have been meeting on Zoom for the past few nights at 7:30 every single night for a quiz. And there are 5 households involved, and each evening a different household comes up with the questions. And aside from the hilarity of watching all of us racking our brains for the answers, it's a really good way of staying connected with each other. And we've also had a lot of fun as well. Always ending the day with a massive, great big smile, and looking forward to the next one. So that's my what's been good. Tell me, what are yours? Tell me something that's been good. You had pizza, Sanjay. Do you know what? We're having pizza tonight. I found this really good dough mix for a paleo pizza, so very low carb. That means I can have it. So yeah, that's a definite what's been good. Any others? Something that's been good today or in the last week? It's up to you. What else has been good? I'm going to let you think about that while I just crack on and just share something that's been good. I'm going to explain to you why we asked that question. So if you've been following the post in this group, you'll already know the answer to this. But the first reason is that it makes us feel good. And that genuinely did. Sanjay's had pizza, and I'm looking forward to mine. And that's because when we hear good news, or something that's been good for another person, it causes us to emotionally connect with what the other person is experiencing. But there is another reason, which is perhaps even more important. And some of you will already know this. And that's because there's a specific part of the human brain that we absolutely have to access in order to answer the question. And the part of the brain that we have to access to answer that question is the opposite part of the brain that we operate from when we are experiencing any compromise at all to our mental well-being. It's the same part of the brain, though, that enables us to take in new information, learn new information, so retain and recall that information, and really importantly, to develop the skills and confidence to apply it. So I'm going to be sharing a lot more information about this part of the brain that I'm talking about in live lesson 2, which is next Monday. But for today, I just want you to remember this, that we cannot answer that question, what's been good, from the same part of our brain that we are operating from when we are experiencing overwhelm or anxiety or any negative stress symptom. So in order to answer the question, we literally have to change the part of our brain that we operate from. And in doing that, we access the part of our brain that also enables us to seek solutions. And this is the part of our brain that we need access to now more than ever before. So this is a really great tool to use at home. And I know some of you already are, with your loved ones and especially with children, but also at work as well. So rather than the traditional kind of greeting, how are you? Try asking what's been good instead. And what you'll notice is how differently people respond. So let's have a look. Sarah, oh, you had a great training session. Brilliant. I missed my training with you, Sarah. Rosie, you've written all your newsletters. Ah, sitting in the field with your horses. I know that would have made you really happy. A phone call with a colleague, playing table tennis. Yeah, brilliant. And of course, all of those things are generating happy hormones as well, which we're going to be talking about in lesson 3. So why we're here to talk about mental health. So let's understand about this a bit more about this topic. So I'm going to start with a statistic. And this is a statistic from the mental health charity Mind. And the statistic is that 1 in 4 people in the UK will be experiencing a mental health issue at any one time. Now, the first thing is, I'm wondering if that surprises you. We've been sharing this statistic for some time now, and as recently as 18 months ago, it mostly came as a surprise to people. And the reality is it's less of a surprise now, and that's really encouraging because it's showing us just how far we've come in already starting to improve awareness about mental health. However, whilst we might all understand this statistic, it can be useful just to put it into context, just to help us understand it a little bit more. So if you compare that to the number of people in your workplace or in your network, so if you work with 40 people or if you network with 40 people, then what that statistic is telling you is that at any one time, the likelihood is that 10 of them may be, or will be, the statistic implies, affected by a mental health issue of some sort. And I think that's really quite sobering as a perspective on it. Now, the interesting thing is that this will obviously affect the individual who's experiencing the issue, but it also has the potential to affect anyone with whom that person comes into context. And in the context of the workplace, affect anyone with whom that person works. And of course, that has an impact on the organisation, no matter how large or small, which ultimately impacts everyone who works within it or is impacted by it. So mental health really does genuinely have an impact on everyone. So we're talking about this term mental health, and what do we mean by it? Now, there are many different ways of defining the term, and if you go onto Google, you'll find lots of them. We like most definitions by the World Health Organization, and they define mental health as this: a person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being. Now, what you might notice about that definition is that it doesn't differentiate between good or bad. It doesn't differentiate between positive or negative. It simply refers to someone's state at any one time with regards to their psychological and emotional well-being. Now, I think that's really interesting because when we hear the term physical health, my experience is that most of us think of a person's state with regards to their physiological well-being. So in other words, we don't tend to think either good or bad. But let's be really honest here. When we hear the term mental health, what do we tend to think? We tend to default to thinking problem. So somewhere along the line, we've become conditioned to associate the term mental health with a negative. And it's an unconscious bias that many of us have, not through choice. When actually the reality is that we all have it, mental health, just like we all have physical health. It just depends on what's going on in our life and the circumstances as to whether or not that's a good or bad state. So what does it look like when somebody has positive mental health? So when somebody's mentally healthy. So that's defined as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being. So not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And mental health, and this might interest you, is defined as a state of psychological, emotional and spiritual well-being that enables us to live optimum and realise our potential. So a positive mental state is not just about the absence of anxiety or any other stress symptom. It's much more than that. It's about having a mental state that enables us ultimately to be the best version of ourselves. And that's the first way that mental health is often misunderstood. So how do we recognise it, this state of mental health? So we find that it can be really useful physical health, which is often characterised by things, I don't know if you'd agree, like strength or flexibility or having endurance or the absence of injuries or ailments or skin that's glowing or strong nails or white teeth, shiny hair, to name a few. And they're the kind of things that people often tell us in our training, that's how you can tell that somebody is physically healthy. And physical health is relatively easy for us to spot because these are signs that we can actually see and observe that tell us that somebody is healthy. And we can also often tell when somebody is not in positive physical health simply by what we see. Equally, we can tell if we ourselves are not in good physical health when we suffer in these areas. And the other interesting thing is that when we do suffer with issues around strength or flexibility, or when we have injuries or ailments, we know that something isn't quite right. And most of us, arguably not all of us, but most of us will talk relatively openly and comfortably about these issues and go and take some action to resolve them. So that's physical health, but good mental health is much less physically observable than physical health. It's not so easy to spot simply by looking at somebody if they are in good mental health. And the interesting thing here is that it's mostly observable through their behaviour. And that's because it's characterised by things like somebody's ability to do certain things. So the ability to learn new information and skills, which I talked about earlier on, to retain and recall information, the ability to feel and express emotion, the ability to form and end relationships. And that's really important, actually, the ability to end relationships that don't serve us anymore, the ability to cope with conflicts, our ability to affect our own mood as well, and our ability to adapt to change. And this was really, really important, the ability to make a proper assessment of a situation and find solutions. And that last one's very strongly connected to the point I was making earlier about this specific part of the brain that enables us to do this. And again, I'll be sharing a lot more about that in live lesson 2, which is next Monday. So we may know that mental health is the ability to do all of these things. It's important to recognise, though, that whilst being in this state is obviously preferable, it's not realistic to expect to be in this state all the time. And that's another common misunderstanding, is this kind of belief that there's this aspiration to be in positive well-being 100% of the time. And whilst many people will enjoy good mental health much of the time, very few people have good mental health all of the time. Just like physical health, mental health isn't constant. You know, we're human beings. We're complex. You know, we have things like wants and needs and beliefs and values and emotions and expectations. These are the things that drive us and also drive how we behave. So it isn't realistic to expect that all of these things will be met at all times. And this is where I really, really love the Chinese concept or Chinese philosophy around Yin Yang, because Yin Yang describes how seemingly opposite or contrary forces, so conflicting forces, are actually complementary and interdependent. And the best example of this is something simple like night and day. Day is only day when you compare it to night, and equally night's only night when you compare it to day, because without the other one they don't exist. Equally, good or positive is only good or positive when compared to bad or negative. And happiness is only happiness when you compare it to something that opposes that. So we don't ever have 24-hour daylight. Equally, we don't have 100% good mental health either. It's not constant, and I don't think that it's something that we can realistically aspire to. And actually, I would even argue that it's arguably not healthy to aspire to be in positive mental health 100% of the time. So that's the term mental health, and hopefully that's just got everybody just thinking about the way that we perceive this whole concept of mental well-being. But what is mental ill health? Because mental ill health is something that we are seeing either because we're seeing people talk about it more, or we're certainly seeing, as a result of the modern world, more and more, whether it's in the media, whether it's on social media, or whether it's actually within our workplaces or within our social groups. And mental ill health is defined as a condition that affects a person's emotions, their thoughts and their behaviours in a way that it disrupts their ability to carry out everyday activities, including their work, and then this bit's really interesting, or to engage in satisfying personal relationships. And I think that last bit's really, really important. You know, a condition that affects our ability to engage in satisfying personal relationships, because personal relationships, satisfying ones, are really, really key to mental well-being. And often, when we find that our mental well-being is compromised, it tends to show up, actually, in our relationships, whether that's at home, in our social lives, and of course, at work too. So, mental ill health, some people will have one episode in their lifetime, some people may not have any, and others may have multiple episodes with long periods of wellness in between. Very few people have ongoing mental ill health. Recovery from mental health conditions is very, very high. And this is another interesting thing. When we are delivering training around mental health awareness, we spend quite a lot of time looking at specific mental health conditions, and I don't have time to share them all, but one point I did want to make with you is that there are a number of conditions that you may have come across, and they tend to fall into two different categories. And the first category is what are common conditions, also termed as neurosis disorders or mood disorders, and even the term neurosis has a connotation now. And that's defined as symptoms that show up and are considered to be as a result of normal emotional experiences or reactions to circumstances. Now, we share 10 of these kind of common neurosis mood disorders, and it might surprise you, it might not, that these include things like anxiety, panic attacks, self-harm, obsessive compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, eating disorders. So conditions that perhaps some of us might not perceive to be considered to be simply a response to circumstances. So I think that's a little bit of an eye-opener, is that these conditions that perhaps we can be quite fearful of because we don't understand them, are actually coming under this kind of category of a normal response to what's happening in our lives. And the second category are the less common conditions, also described as psychosis disorders. And just to put it into context, these are symptoms that are considered not to be as a result of normal emotional experiences, and we share 3 of these. So actually there are significantly less of these conditions, which demonstrates just how much more prevalent these normal reactions are to ones that are considered not to be normal. So what's the impact, of mental ill health? Now, firstly, mental ill health has been rated by experts as being amongst the most disabling of illnesses. And just to put some context around that, a disability is considered a disability based on the extent to which the condition affects the person's ability to live and work. And that includes looking after themselves, have relationships with friends and family. They also say that the degree of disability that can occur during an episode of mental ill health can be comparable to that caused by physical illnesses too. Mental ill health is a major cause of long-term disability, and it ranks very highly on the scale of disease burden, and that's alongside conditions like heart disease, cancer, and musculoskeletal disorders. Now, I found that very surprising when I first discovered that fact. So disease burden is the combined effect of premature death and years lived with disability caused by illness. Some mental health illnesses have a dramatic impact by causing premature death, sometimes as a result of alcohol and substance abuse, sometimes prolonged stress, which can result in many physical disorders like heart disease. Various cancers have been linked to stress, and of course we all know that in very extreme cases some people may choose to take their own life too. The other thing about mental health disorders is that often they can start in early childhood or adolescence, and when they start at this time in life, they can significantly affect a young person's education, their movement into adult occupational roles, their ability to form social key relationships, and of course there's the likelihood, or the increased likelihood, of alcohol or substance abuse too. So a mental illness or mental ill health can cause disability across a person's lifespan. And one of the things that I really want to convey here is that often additional suffering is caused as a direct result of stigma. So lack of understanding, unconscious bias, and as a result the subsequent rejection that occurs because of that stigma, as well as inadequate levels of support. And I think we all know that, we don't have the levels of support out there, and all of those things can not only get in the way of recovery, but they can actually make the condition worse too. People with long-term mental ill health have been shown to have the lowest employment rates in the UK for any group of disability. And this is the reality. Many people are living with mental ill health every day, and they are living meaningful and satisfying lives and contributing, significant value to the lives of others. I know some of them personally. But the extent to which this is true is very dependent on the level of understanding and support available to them to enable them to make the adjustments necessary to enable that to happen. And this is where stigma surrounding mental health has the greatest impact, because it's not always readily visible to people, and because there's historically been much less focus on and therefore understanding of mental illness. Sometimes people with a mental illness can be judged very negatively. We do an activity in our workshops where we ask people to, talk about ways that somebody may be judged, and we hear things like weak, lazy, uncooperative, difficult, selfish, attention-seeking, lying, not really ill. And this type of attitude is not only unfounded and therefore unfair, but it's also very damaging, because it's actually the opposite of what they need in order to get well again. So if we can remove the stigma that creates this judgment, then we have a chance of supporting people back into positive mental health again. The truth is that mental ill health affects 1 in 4 people in the UK at any one time. And the other thing to be aware of is that it's not as simple as being on this kind of linear line between positive and negative mental well-being. Mental health is best understood as a matrix where you have 4 quadrants, and somebody can have a mental illness that's been diagnosed and have exceptionally high levels of general mental well-being, and equally somebody can have no diagnosis at all and show very low levels of mental well-being. We all have the potential to experience compromised mental health when life gets tough or challenging. And so if there's anything I'd like us to take from this lesson, it's to understand that by understanding mental health a bit better, we have the opportunity of, well, hopefully getting rid of the stigma, but certainly reducing it enough so that we can better support it and in effect reduce it. So I really hope that introduction to mental health has been useful and that you've enjoyed this live lesson. Next Monday, which is the 4th of May, we're going to have live lesson 2, and this is going to be an exploration of the stress, because many mental health challenges are directly linked to stress. So we're going to talk about what stress is, why and how it's created, the impact it has on the brain and the body and the workplace, and what we can do proactively and intentionally to limit that impact. You'll leave with a greater appreciation of stress, an increased awareness and some insight into your own stress triggers and how they manifest for you physically, specifically. It's also going to include a tour of the human brain and about 2 million years of evolution. So please pop the date in your diary and the time, next Monday, the 4th of May at 7:30. And if you haven't already, do turn on notifications for this group so that you're alerted when the page goes live. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much for everyone for staying on tonight. If you've got any questions, please post them in the group and I'll do my best to answer them. And in the meantime, have a great week and come prepared next Monday for me to ask you what's been good. I'll see you in the group. Thank you, guys.